Hey listeners, this is Peter and welcome back to the History Shorts. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the world. Download Podcast Republic today, available on Google Play and the Apple App Store. Today on History Shorts. In an age of revolution, one man stood like a wall. While kings fell, thrones crumbled, and the ideas of liberty spread like wildfire across Europe, Klemens von Metternich believed that he could hold back that very tide of freedom. For nearly 40 years, he succeeded, or at least it seemed that he succeeded. But when the dam finally broke, it swept away everything he had built. This is the story of the Age of Metternich, the man who tried to keep Europe's old order alive in a world that was changing forever. Our history brief will reflect on perhaps history's most humbling lesson. Let's get to it. A quick word from our sponsors. This day in history. On February 3, 1870, the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified, prohibiting the denial of voting rights based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. On February 3, 1959, a small plane carrying musicians Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and J.P. the Big Bopper Richardson crashed in Iowa, killing all on board. The tragedy became known as the day the music died. Story of the day. When Napoleon Bonaparte finally fell in 1815, Europe lay in ruins. For 2 decades, revolution and war had torn the continent apart. Borders had shifted, monarchs had fled, and millions had died. As the smoke cleared from Waterloo, Europe's rulers gathered to rebuild the world, not in the name of liberty, equality, or fraternity, but in the name of order. The meeting that would decide Europe's future was held in Vienna, the capital of the Austrian Empire. And at the center stood one man, Prince Klemens von Metternich. He was elegant, calculating, and supremely confident. A master diplomat and consummate conservative, Metternich saw himself as the surgeon who would heal Europe's body by amputating its revolutionary soul. His goal was simple: to restore the old order, monarchy, hierarchy, and stability, and all to prevent another Napoleon from ever rising again. The Congress of Vienna in 1814 and 1815 was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Delegates from more than 200 states, kingdoms, and empires descended on Vienna for what became both a diplomatic marathon and a grand social spectacle. Balls, banquets, operas, and intrigue behind every curtain. At the table were the victors of Napoleon's defeat: Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria. Metternich hosted them all, charming, negotiating, and manipulating with the grace of a man who believed diplomacy was theater. His mission was to restore legitimacy, to put the rightful monarchs back on their thrones, and to rebuild Europe's political balance so that no single power could ever dominate the continent again. Out of this came the Concert of Europe, a system of alliances designed to keep peace through cooperation and mutual restraint. Under Metternich's guidance, the great powers redrew the map. France was contained but not humiliated. The Netherlands was merged with Belgium as a buffer against France. Prussia gained territory in the Rhineland. Austria expanded its influence over northern Italy and Central Europe. And the ancient monarchies, from Spain to Sweden, were all restored. For a brief, glittering moment, it seemed that Metternich had done the impossible. He had rebuilt Europe after Napoleon without another war. He had created what some called the Long Peace, which would actually last nearly 100 years. But that peace came at a price. To Metternich, revolution was not just political. It was a disease, and he intended to cure it with surveillance, censorship, and control. From 1815 onward, Austria became the epicenter of political repression in Europe. Metternich's networks of spies and informants stretched across the continent. Newspapers were censored, universities were monitored, and public speech was policed. He believed that if people could be kept quiet long enough, they would eventually forget about this thing called democracy and freedom altogether. This web of alliances and repression came to be known as the Metternich system. At its core was a belief that stability mattered more than liberty, that human beings were better off under firm authority than under the chaos of revolution. He once wrote, "The first and greatest concern of every people is its stability. Liberty is not the right of man to act without restraint. It is the right to be well governed." In 1819, when students and liberals began calling for constitutional reform in the German states, Metternich responded with Carlsbad decrees, laws that banned student organizations, censored books, and allowed for the arrest of anyone suspected of revolutionary tendencies. For nearly the rest of the century, Austria became the policeman of Europe, and Metternich its chief constable. From 1815 to 1848, Metternich dominated European diplomacy. He became the most powerful man on the continent, not because of armies, but because of his influence. When revolutions flared in Italy or Spain, he orchestrated interventions by conservative monarchs to crush them immediately. When nationalism stirred in Germany or Hungary, he smothered it under bureaucracy and surveillance. He worked tirelessly to keep the European powers in balance, maintaining peace not through progress but through paralysis. This period became known as the Age of Metternich, an era of reaction and restraint, where every whisper of change was met with the iron hand of tradition. And for a time, it worked. Europe avoided major wars for over 3 decades, an astonishing achievement considering the centuries of conflict beforehand. But under the surface, pressure was building. By the 1830s, cracks began to show in Metternich's carefully constructed order. Industrialization was transforming Europe's cities. A new middle class emerged, educated, restless, and unwilling to be silenced. Nationalism was on the rise. Italians dreamed of uniting their fragmented peninsula. Germans longed for one nation under one flag. Hungarians and Czechs demanded autonomy within the Austrian Empire itself. And in 1830, revolution once again erupted, this time in France, where King Charles X was overthrown and replaced by the more liberal Louis Philippe. To Metternich, it was the nightmare reborn. He worked frantically to contain the shockwaves, but the ideas of 1789, liberty, nationalism, and democracy, could not be bombed or censored away. They were spreading faster than ever, carried by newspapers, songs, and secret societies. And by 1848, the pressure finally exploded. 1848 is known as the year Europe caught fire. From Paris to Vienna, Berlin to Budapest, revolutions erupted almost simultaneously, demanding constitutions, free speech, and national self-determination. In Austria, crowds filled the streets of Vienna, denouncing the police state Metternich had built. For years, he had warned that giving an inch to revolutionaries would lead to chaos, and now chaos was at his doorstep. The mob stormed his palace. Metternich, the man who had once bent kings to his will, disguised himself as an old woman and fled Vienna under cover of night. He crossed the border into England, a broken man, watching from exile as the empire he had ruled for decades teetered on the edge of collapse. Though some revolts were later crushed, the world had changed. The age of Metternich was over. Metternich died in 1859, an old man living quietly in Vienna once more. By then, the forces that he had tried to contain, nationalism, liberalism, and industrialization, had reshaped Europe beyond recognition. Italy and Germany would soon unify into modern nation-states. Constitutional monarchies would replace absolute ones. Empires would crumble and republics would rise. To many historians, Metternich represents the last gasp of the old world, a man who tried to preserve feudal Europe against the unstoppable march of modernity. To others, he was a pragmatist who maintained peace during one of history's most fragile centuries, a diplomat who understood that the price of order is often freedom. Even Karl Marx, writing in exile in London, begrudgingly admitted that Metternich's system had delayed revolution, but only delayed it. The world that emerged after his fall was turbulent and bloody, but it was also freer. The History Brief. At some point, quietly, almost uncomfortably, we all have to confront the same truth. In 100 years, every one of us will be gone. I guess the older I get and the more I study history and read about people long gone, the more I think about this. Not to sound morbid. Our names may survive in a family tree, a photograph, a story told once or twice at a holiday table, but for most of us, the details will fade. Our voices, our fears, the things that kept us awake at night, the moments we thought defined our lives. Think about your own family. How much do you really know about your great-grandparents? You might know where they were born, maybe how they died, or a job title, a war they lived through. But do you know what they were afraid of, who they loved most, what they regretted, what they hoped their children would become or remember about them? And yet, our great-grandparents, and beyond, they lived full lives. They worried about money. They experienced loss. They laughed at small, forgettable moments that meant everything at that time. They fell in love, argued, made mistakes, and believed just as we do that their lives mattered. Genealogy isn't just about names and dates, it's about perspective. It reminds us that we are not the first people to feel overwhelmed by the world, and we won't be the last. That the anxieties we think are uniquely modern, uncertainty, grief, ambition, love, are as old as humanity itself. And maybe that's the quiet responsibility we carry. Not to be remembered forever, but to live in a way that honors the fact that others once did the same, even though we barely know their stories now. Because one day, we'll become someone else's distant ancestor, a name on a chart, or a faded photo. And the question won't be whether we were remembered perfectly, but whether we lived fully, knowing that time would move on without us. History certainly humbles us that way. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today and helping to make this little show such a mighty success. If you are enjoying this show and would like to help with its production, you can always donate a few dollars at buymeacoffee.com or become a Patreon member to enjoy these episodes ad-free. Both links can be found on the website at www.historyshortspodcast.com. Have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you all again tomorrow.